So, just a couple of minutes ago, I came across a thread in the forums asking the reader if they've had any paranormal or creepy things happen to them. Wow, it got me thinking about this one time I was evacuated from my childhood town. I must have been about 7 at the time, and I can somewhat remember the event clearly, even if most of it is pretty hard to recall. Since all you guys are looking for a good scare, I'll give it a shot and I'll tell the tale. So in my childhood town, I had a good friend named Finney. Finney and I were really close, almost like brothers. I was an only child growing up, and I hung out with Finney almost every day if my memory serves right. My childhood memories were so precious, and the town itself was so peaceful and benevolent. The town was surrounded by woods, and it even had its own police station and town hall. Everything was picture perfect. Everything was fine until there was a month of rain. When I say a month of rain, I literally mean it. It would never stop raining. It rained that whole month, non-stop, and it was kind of strange since the rain came in unannounced by a meteorologist. It was almost similar to that of a hurricane with strong winds, thunder, and lightning. It almost came out of nowhere. It just started pouring. The sky went dim and gloomy, and the clouds rolled in, and the rain fell, and it continued for as long as I can remember. Eventually the ponds, the canals, the rivers would start rising due to the heavy rain, and the flooding all took place within the first 2 weeks. I remember this one night when it was thundering. I was looking outside of my window. I noticed that the lightning had strange colors. Some would look orange and others would look green, and some even purple. This made the rainfall even harder. Eventually the waters had gotten so high that it reached up to our ankles. We would still go to school since they thought that the floods were not too big of a deal, and they made us wear raincoats, boots, and also made us take umbrellas with us every day. We all took notice that there was an outbreak of insomnia amongst the children at the time ever since the rain had arrived. I found it hard to sleep as well, and it was one of the many reasons I looked at the lightning at night. We all felt so drawn to the rain, and found it strangely soothing and calming. The lights continued in the sky every night until, eventually, there was the loudest thunderstrike. At least I thought it was. I bet it woke the entire town up. It struck somewhere within the woods, and then things got weird. Every night, we'd hear weird noises, voices, whispers, and scratching outside. Sinkholes or burrows could be found all over patios, lawns, gardens, and in the woods. The water rose up to our waist, and eventually, school was called off on occasion. My friend Finney and some of the other kids on our clique would visit my house often to play. Sometimes they might even stay the night. I remember this one time, waking up one night and being drawn to the window. We were in our living room, and my other friend Bryce was looking outside of the window that I felt enticed to look out when I woke up. He and 2 other kids were at the window looking outside as if intrigued. They said that somebody was calling out to them and inviting them to come play in the rain. We looked outside and we saw nothing. A few minutes passed as we continued to look out the window, feeling strangely enticed to go outside. Eventually, the rain hit harder, and it also appeared that something was swimming in my flooded backyard. It never emerged from the water to show its identity, or even what it was. We just assumed that it was the rain making weird patterns in the water as it hit. The urge to go outside remained though, and we all began to hear the whispers again. They usually range from, "Come outside, it is safe," or "Come play with us." Most of what somebody would say to convince a child to come out of a hiding spot. My dad came home, and we pretended to sleep since it was way past our bedtimes. My dad was a cop and was working hard lately. My friends and I didn't really know why. I remember my dad walking in and speaking to my mother. He said that kids were disappearing one by one, and they've had no luck with catching the kidnapper, and that the abductions were taking place much more frequently. It was true. Walter, Lee, and Jennifer, and many others didn't show up to school, or any type of meeting place that we would visit. I remember his face being so discouraged and worried, almost sickened. I remember Mom and Dad's conversation, as my friends and I lied awake listening to every detail. We couldn't find a single trace. Some were even taken from home, and there was no sign of forced entry. He said, and my mother sat next to him trying to comfort him. Other conversations went on, but nothing too relevant to what was happening at the time, and they eventually went to bed. However, before they did, they made sure to lock all of the doors and shut all of the curtains. My friends and I just stayed up talking about what we had heard, and made up our own little ideas on what was happening, but all far too childish. From time to time, the whispers would return and they would wake us up. Sometimes it was even scratching or clawing at the walls or the windows. We wouldn't dare to open the curtains and see what it was for ourselves. Who could blame us? I mean, there was a madman that kidnapped children on the loose. And these events had went on for weeks, and the kidnappings only got worse. Houses were found empty in the morning, and sometimes some kids would be left behind, too traumatized to speak and alone in the house with, again, no signs of forced entry. The town was mortified, and eventually a town meeting was called. Some of my friends were missing too, and all that was left of my clique was Finney and Dalton. We waited outside of the courthouse with my mom as it went on. I remember asking about what they were talking about, but my mom would always avoid telling me, usually by saying, "Some very boring stuff grown-ups talk about, dear," or "You're too young, you wouldn't understand. Plus you'd probably fall asleep. It's pretty long, honey." I remember the night before the evacuation, exactly one day before the month finished. I lived next door to Dalton, and it was the night that I saw him leave. The lights didn't even go on. They just sort of went out of the house, leaving everything behind. They didn't bother to lock the door, they didn't bother to pack, and they didn't bother to change clothing. They left the front door and they walked into the woods. I was assuming that they were taking a shortcut, but I still found it pretty strange. It was drizzling a bit as they left, and the rain was beginning to die down. I started hearing the whispers again, only much louder. I looked out of my window and I continued to look into the flooded streets. I saw strange patterns in the water again, as if it was trailing a moving object under the water. I remember that there was a crazy person stealing children at night, and I decided to close my curtains so that nobody could see into my room. And then the clawing and scratching began. The whispers and scratching never left, and I was surprised I even fell asleep. I was woken up by my mother and the sound of the emergency evacuation alarm that the town hall had set off. I was too groggy to panic, and I just followed my mom outside. We were going through our escape route that went through higher terrain within the woods, and we took a dirt road. As we plodded through the water, we met with Finney and his mother. They both talked for a while as we paused, awaiting others to join us. My father and a couple of his squad came through the road, bearing shotguns and flashlights. My mother asked him what he was doing, and my father only replied, "We found the place that they were keeping the children," and the grimmest of expressions I've ever seen. My mother kissed him goodbye and wished him and his squad good luck as they trudged through the murky, muddy waters and into the deep woods. My mom motioned for me to come with her, but suddenly another woman came asking for help. My mom told me and Finney to stay put as she left with Finney's mother to assist the woman. We did as we were told, and stood in the mucky and murky waters. We began to hear the faint whispers again, and felt soothingly relaxed. The feeling was ominous, and it persisted for the duration that we spent waiting for our mothers to return. I remember tripping into the water, or so I thought, until I couldn't seem to stand up. I panicked when I felt a force pulling me into the water, and as I heard Finney's panicked screams, I felt a hand grab tightly onto my shoulder and pull me under the surface. My mother carried me and placed me under the nearby fence and checked on me. I thought I probably tripped into a sinkhole or a deep area of the trail since there are so many holes around here. I noticed Finney's mother calling out his name and searching for him everywhere. I didn't realize that Finney had fallen in with me too. I continued thinking it was a sinkhole we'd slipped into, and that's what I told Finney's mother and my mom. That is until I felt a throbbing pain and a bruise on my ankle. Until inspecting it, we found that a skinny, bony handprint was left on it. Another loud clash of lightning occurred and it began to rain again. We eventually reached the high ground, and we got into the buses and cars that waited for us. And many of the cars there were loved ones and family that came to pick up the townspeople that evacuated. We found that my uncle was waiting for us, and we got into his car. I didn't see my dad or Finney at the evacuation area. Come to think of it, I never saw my dad or his squad again. They were announced missing. And to this day, I'm still not sure what happened to them or Finney along with any of the other children. I am certain of one thing though. There was something lying in the water